The courtroom was already tense before witness 49 took the stand. Leah Ford had reviewed the file 3 times and still could not understand why this low-level intern had even been subpoenaed. The testimony was expected to be routine. It was not. He spoke calmly at first, just noting the time he left the building that Friday. But then he mentioned a conversation that no one else had reported. A conversation that had supposedly happened after the victim was already gone. Names. Times. A distinct phrase that had surfaced once in sealed records. Lee's pen froze halfway across her notepad. The defense attorney shifted in his seat. The judge raised an eyebrow. The court reporter typed more slowly now. Lee glanced toward the gallery and saw the suspect still, confident, blinking just a little too often. When witness 49 repeated the exact words the victim was last known to say, Lee realized 2 things. 1. This was no ordinary memory. 2. Someone in the courtroom had just started to panic. Leah Ford had handled minor testimonies before, the kind that filled gaps and padded timelines. Witness 49 was filed under just that. A scheduling formality, someone present but peripheral. He had been an intern at the corporate building where Margaret Weller disappeared, and his name had surfaced only once in early paperwork, scribbled on an attendance sheet logged by Human Resources. No interview, no follow-up, nothing. The police had skipped him in the initial sweep. Lee nearly had as well, but protocol demanded completeness. So when he arrived at court that morning in an ill-fitted suit and jittery silence, Lee noted him but expected little. She focused on her main burden, stitching a watertight case against Nathan Cole, the company's rising star executive who was, by all appearances, the last person to see Margaret alive. Margaret's body had never been found. No blood. No confirmed crime scene. Just a vanishing on a Friday evening that left no trace. Surveillance tapes were incomplete, one camera inoperative, another feed overwritten due to a processing delay. The elevator logs were inexplicably missing 2 time blocks. It all circled Cole, but nothing nailed him down. The case was circumstantial until now. Witness 49 took the stand just after 10. The court was half empty, and Lee prepared herself for a redundant 10 minutes of testimony. The intern, Michael Trent, recited his work hours, confirmed he had seen Margaret that afternoon near the break room, and was about to move on when he paused. He hesitated just enough to rattle Lee's instincts. Then he added something not in his initial affidavit. He said Margaret had spoken to someone at 5:30 near the emergency stairwell just outside the server room. That location had never come up in previous interviews. It had been cleared. But Michael's recollection was detailed. The stairwell's cold, the smell of lemon cleaner, the hum of the air duct. He said he had heard Margaret say something strange. She told the other person, whose face he never saw, that she did not want to stay late again. That last time was a mistake. The phrasing caught Lee instantly. Last time had been in sealed HR records referring to a prior unlogged late night involving Cole and Margaret. No one outside the legal team should have known it. Lee's heart rate rose. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Across the aisle, Nathan Cole did not flinch. He just sat with a faint smile and perfect posture. But his right hand, resting on the armrest, had started tapping a soft, irregular beat. After the court recessed, Lee skipped lunch. She pulled the intern's original employee file. It was nearly blank. No HR notes, no emails, not even a manager sign-off on his exit form. That in itself was strange. The company was rigid with documentation. Lee called it to request any internal messages from Michael Trent during the week of the disappearance. Most were mundane, but one jumped out. It was an email Michael had sent to himself 3 days after Margaret vanished. The subject line read, "I still remember." The body included a timestamp, 5:33 p.m., and the words, "stairwell." She said it again, nothing else. No recipient. No attachments. Lee's pulse spiked. If that email was real, it confirmed Michael had heard something when emotions were raw, not fabricated under pressure months later. She needed more. By 4 p.m., she had gained access to building maintenance records. One stood out. A work order for stairwell lighting repairs requested by the head of facilities just 1 day after Margaret vanished. The reason listed was glare in camera feed. except that stairwell had not been marked as having any installed cameras. Lee ordered a forensic review of archived facility maps. Hidden in a forgotten architectural diagram was a note. A decommissioned server closet adjacent to that stairwell had once held a wall-mounted recording unit for motion detection. It had been marked offline since a renovation 5 years earlier, but no one had checked the closet itself. The next morning, accompanied by 2 tech specialists and a building supervisor, Lee entered the closet. It smelled of dust and long-disused plastic. A rusted cabinet sat against the wall, the door stuck until one technician pried it open. Inside, covered in grime and insulation flakes, was a small black box with a faded red indicator light still glowing faintly. They extracted the drive. Lee sent it directly to digital forensics. Recovery was slow. The device had not been serviced in years, but fragments of visual data had survived. After 5 hours, one file rendered clear enough to view. The timestamp read 5:31 p.m., same day Margaret vanished. The video showed a dim stairwell. Margaret entered from the second-floor landing. She paused. A tall figure appeared from the right edge, partial frame only. No face, but height, build, and posture closely resembled Nathan Cole. He stepped toward her. She flinched slightly. Then she said something, no audio track, but her lips moved clearly. Lee's forensic lip reader spent 2 hours verifying it. The words were, "This is not happening again." By then, Lee's suspicion had hardened into belief. Michael had not just been a lucky observer. He had remembered what no one else had even noticed. He had held on to a fragment the entire system had missed. And now his quiet statement had cracked the case open. But as Lee prepared to enter the second week of trial, a new email landed in her inbox. It was unsigned. No subject line. No body. Just an attachment, a screenshot of the courtroom that morning, zoomed in on Michael Trent's face. Underneath, 2 words were typed in bold: "He lied." Lee stared at the screenshot. The resolution was grainy, but there was no mistaking the expression on Michael Trent's face. Calm, blank, forgettable. The kind of face that belonged in the background of a crowd photo, not at the center of a trial. The email's attachment carried no metadata. It had been routed through 3 proxy servers, the final bounce coming from a public Wi-Fi network tied to a bookstore with no cameras. The digital trail stopped there. The message was silent, anonymous, and precise, just 2 words: "He lied." Lee's first instinct was denial. Michael's testimony had unlocked new angles. The video evidence, however degraded, had corroborated his account. Yet the email's implications sank into her thoughts like cold iron. If Michael had fabricated or distorted his memory, the prosecution could collapse. Worse, it would hand Nathan Cole's defense team ammunition they did not need. Lee called in digital forensics and requested an independent audit of Michael's work device and personal laptop, which the court had already cleared for testimony integrity. They began a deep search for cached messages, ghost files, deleted notes. Meanwhile, Lee requested that Michael remain on standby for a follow-up interview. She spent the next hours rewatching his testimony. Every blink, every pause, every shift in posture. He had not seemed rehearsed, but he had not seemed rattled either. That in itself became unsettling. His recall was too clean, the phrasing too specific. The following morning, the forensic team returned with early results. Michael's home laptop revealed several access attempts to news databases that predated his testimony by weeks. He had researched the case extensively, public sources only, nothing sealed. But among his browsing history was something odd, a cached version of a court transcript draft that had not been officially published yet. Lee's eyes narrowed. The draft contained interview summaries and partial statements. It was possible Michael had accessed it through a leak, but from whom? The list of people with pre-release access was short: Lee, her lead investigator, the judge, the court reporter, and a single paralegal. Lee had no evidence to accuse any of them, but the idea of an internal leak rattled her. If Michael had read through the draft, he could have constructed a testimony that mimicked truth without being grounded in fact. She requested a closed-door meeting with the judge. The defense team was not notified. Lee needed discretion. In chambers, she laid out the email, the file discrepancies, and her concern that Michael's testimony, while compelling, might be partially constructed. The judge listened without interrupting, then leaned back and said one thing: "If he is fabricating, let the cross-examination expose it. Do not suppress your strongest piece unless you are certain it will break." Lee left the room uncertain. The judge was not wrong. But the weight of a potentially false testimony could destroy the case if exposed mid-trial. That afternoon, she received a call from her forensic tech. He had gone deeper into Michael's device history and found something buried in a system folder, an audio recording file, time-stamped 2 months before trial. It lasted only 12 seconds. Lee listened closely. A male voice, nervous and unsteady, whispered. She said it again. "Same stairwell. I heard it. I did not imagine it. I need to tell someone." There was a pause. Then the same voice, steadier now. "Unless this is already too late." It was Michael. The tone was genuine, unpracticed, and private. He had recorded it for himself. It had never been sent or shared. Lee's instincts realigned. If he was lying, why make a secret recording that no one else would hear? She played the file 3 times. Michael's voice had conviction, not the bravado of someone inventing a role, but the anxiety of someone afraid their memory might dissolve before they could prove it mattered. Still, the email warning lingered. Lee had it analyzed for embedded data. The message itself held no hidden metadata or geotags, but the screenshot had one unusual element: a file tag in the corner, standard in image sorting software, that read CTRL-12. It was a code Lee recognized. In the court's internal filing system, CTRL-12 was the reference code for raw camera feeds, the unfiltered, uncompressed versions used by internal security. That meant the person who sent the message had access to surveillance beyond what the courtroom provided. A judge's clerk might. So might a law enforcement tech assistant. Or someone planted. Lee changed tactics. She met with Michael privately under procedural review, not cross-examination. The meeting was recorded but not admitted as testimony. She asked him, calmly and without preamble, if he had ever seen an early court file. He paused, then nodded. "It popped up on my feed," he said. "I do not know how. It was just there. I did not copy it. I just read it." Lee asked if he had changed his statement afterward. "No," he said. "What I told you, I remembered that." I remember her voice. "That file, it just made me realize someone else might remember it too, that I was not losing it." Lee believed him, but belief was not evidence. She pressed further. Why had he recorded that 12-second file? He looked down. "Because I was scared I'd forget, or that I'd convince myself." I never heard her say it. The answer was too human to script. Yet Lee still had a problem. Someone wanted Michael discredited. Someone had access to internal footage, and they were watching the trial unfold in real time. She returned to court the next day with a new strategy. She subpoenaed the full access logs for the building's surveillance archive, not just from the week of the disappearance, but from the last 2 months. The motion was granted. 3 days later, the logs revealed a name Lee had not seen before. A private security consultant listed as J. Carter, flagged with full visual access credentials. Hired by the company 6 weeks after Margaret's disappearance. Never listed as a witness. No contact on file. Lee dug deeper. The consultant's employment history was shell-thin. No verifiable address. And one direct link. He had been signed off by Nathan Cole's executive assistant, a woman who had since resigned and could not be reached. The consultant had downloaded raw footage from courtroom cameras, but not trial sessions, only pre-courtroom lobbies and waiting rooms. He had watched Michael arrive. He had watched Lee meet with him briefly in the hallway. He had tagged files, including the exact screenshot sent to her. Whoever J. Carter was, he had not only infiltrated the trial's periphery, he was shaping it. That night, Lee filed a motion to compel testimony from the consultant, but before it could be served, she received another email. Same sender, same format. One word this time. Stop. The second anonymous email arrived at 2:30 a.m. Lee was at her kitchen table surrounded by manila folders and open case files, halfway through her 3rd mug of black coffee. She had not expected sleep, but she had not expected a second warning either. The word was blunt, unembellished. Stop. She read it 10 times. No threat, no rationale, no conditions. Just the command. She checked the metadata. This time the file had passed through 4 VPN hops and a temporary hosting node in a rural zone with no traceable exit point. It was cleaner than the first. Whoever sent it knew they were being hunted. Lee saved the message, encrypted the folder, and began compiling a report for judicial review. But as she typed, one line kept repeating in her thoughts: "The consultant is not a consultant." She returned to the access logs from the building's archive. The name J. Carter appeared 6 times in 3 weeks, each time cross-linked to a different IP origin. The logins had clearance beyond standard review levels. Lee contacted the archive system administrator and requested login credential trails. After 3 hours, he confirmed that J. Carter's credentials had been manually entered from a high-level corporate account, Nathan Cole's direct terminal. Lee froze. She pulled up Cole's personnel file. It listed several privileges, including emergency access to secure files and approval rights for third-party vendors. The consultant had been routed through those channels. This was not a random hire. J. Carter had been embedded with intent to observe, to manipulate, and possibly to interfere. The following day, Lee filed an emergency motion to summon Carter to testify. But when court officers arrived at the last known address, the unit was vacant. The building manager claimed the tenant had vacated 2 weeks prior. The name J. Carter had never appeared on the lease. Payment was made through an encrypted third-party company that dissolved 2 days earlier. Lee returned to court the next morning with a growing sense of containment. She was no longer just building a case against Nathan Cole. She was unraveling a structure designed to survive exposure. Every piece she uncovered led to another lock, another dead end. But she still had Michael Trent, and Michael's testimony had triggered all of this. Whether he knew it or not, he had said something that pierced through whatever firewall Cole had constructed. The question was what? Lee reopened Margaret Weller's internal complaint file. It had been sparse. One informal grievance filed confidentially, citing inappropriate late-night meetings and vague discomfort. The file had been closed by HR, citing insufficient detail. But in the margin of the intake form, barely legible, was a scribble, mentioned server ghost. Said it twice. The phrase stopped Lee cold. Server ghost. Michael had never used it, but the phrase echoed something in her memory. She pulled transcripts from other employees, interviews done by internal audit weeks after Margaret vanished. One interview, a former junior analyst, referenced an office joke about ghost servers and the cold stairwell. That stairwell again. The one beside the server room. The one where Margaret was last seen. Margaret had used the phrase to describe something that unsettled her, something that lived not in the building's structure, but in its routine. After-hours activities, undocumented meetings, unmonitored spaces. Lee met with a digital forensic investigator to explore deeper into the building's server history. They began mapping connection logs from after-hours logins over a 6-month period. One terminal kept appearing, always between 5:30 and 7 p.m., always accessing sensitive HR files, and always logging in under a generic admin credential. That terminal belonged to Nathan Cole's personal assistant, who had long since resigned. Lee requested a physical review of the server room adjacent to the stairwell. The original investigation had swept it, but without knowing what to look for, they had found nothing. This time, Lee went herself. The server room was colder than the rest of the building. Climate-controlled, dimly lit, lined with humming machines. Near the back, behind a defunct panel, Lee's tech found a concealed USB port with a stripped connector. Inside the port was a fragment of charred plastic and copper, remains of a destroyed flash drive. Lee had it analyzed. The data was gone, but thermal residue revealed the drive had been burned with a high-voltage spike, deliberate sabotage. Someone had erased something, but not everything. One server, marked inactive, was partially recoverable. A forensic crawl retrieved timestamps and partial login credentials. The name M. Weller appeared twice, once on the day she disappeared and once 5 days prior. She had accessed an internal directory flagged ethics internal storage. The file was now empty. Lee was circling something. Margaret had found something. She had tried to preserve it. Michael had heard her speak of fear, and someone had tried to erase all of it. The consultant's purpose was becoming clearer. He had not just watched the trial, he had watched who paid attention. Lee returned to Michael. She called him into a quiet conference room. No cameras, no formality, just clarity. She asked him plainly if he had spoken to anyone about his testimony since taking the stand. He looked confused, then scared, then very still. "Someone called my apartment line," he said. "The day after I testified, I never gave my number to the court." Lee felt her stomach tight. "What did they say?" "They said I remembered wrong, that I had mixed up the voice, that the woman I heard was someone else, but I knew her voice." Michael looked like he had not slept in days. They said not to say anything else." Lee asked if he had a recording. He did not. He had not even told anyone, until now. She asked him if he still stood by his statement. "I do," he said. "I remember what I heard. But now I think they wanted me to remember it for a reason." Lee blinked. "What do you mean?" Michael hesitated. "I think they let me remember just enough to point me in the wrong direction." Lee sat back. The case had begun with a disappearance. It had evolved into obstruction. Now it had taken shape as something more, a misdirection carefully constructed. She pulled out the screenshot again. Michael's face captured mid-glance. The email's title, "He Lied." Maybe it had not meant Michael lied. Maybe it had meant someone lied to him. Suddenly, Lee understood. The consultant had never been targeting Michael. He had been watching Lee, every move, every connection. She turned to her assistant and asked for one more file, the master list of scheduled witnesses. The consultant's name was not there, but someone else's was. A tech support specialist from Cole's department, scheduled for the following week. A man whose work badge ID matched one of the terminal logins Lee had just traced. A man whose digital signature had spiked the voltage that fried the flash drive. And next to his name, written in pencil on the printed docket, was a handwritten note in unfamiliar script. It read, "Stop digging." Lee stared at the handwritten note on the witness docket. "Stop digging." It was not typed. It was not part of the official case file. It had been added manually, quietly, almost casually, as though the person writing it knew it would be found. It was not a threat. It was a signal, a line drawn just before the edge. She requested the original hard copy from the clerk's office. The handwriting did not match anyone on the court team. She ordered forensic comparison. While waiting, she turned her attention to the next witness, Caleb Dryden, a senior-level technician in Cole's department. Dryden was listed as a cooperative witness. His testimony was scheduled to cover access logs and confirm company procedures on data archiving. Nothing controversial. But Lee had just uncovered evidence that someone from his badge ID had been connected to a sabotaged flash drive in the server room. And she had one more suspicion, that Dryden's role in the chain of digital events was not accidental. She called for a sealed preliminary interview before Dryden could take the stand. Inside the interview room, Dryden appeared calm, mid-40s, neatly dressed, confident but not aggressive. He answered questions about protocols, data flow, and terminal access patterns with professional fluency. When asked about the damaged flash drive, he claimed no knowledge. Lee pivoted. She showed him the screenshot of the court email, the one of Michael Trent. Dryden did not blink. He said he had never seen it. She asked if he had ever communicated with a consultant under the name J. Carter. He said the name meant nothing to him. Lee then produced a login log with his badge ID, timestamped 2 days before Margaret disappeared, showing an access point at the off-book server. Dryden hesitated, just for a moment. "That is not my login," he said. "It is spoofed. Our credentials can be cloned internally by anyone with server permissions." Lee leaned forward. And who would have that level of access? Dryden's eyes narrowed slightly. Cole, his assistant, maybe 1 or 2 people in audit. But nobody touches that side of the network unless they are told to. Told to. The phrasing echoed in Lee's mind. She dismissed Dryden, then called her investigator and requested a full activity audit on his credentials, independent of the corporate records. It would take 48 hours. In the meantime, she returned to the phrase Margaret had once used, server ghost. There was something deeper in those words. Not fear of a place, fear of a presence. something that operated in the shadows of protocol. She cross-referenced prior employee complaints and found one more quiet mention from 2 years earlier. A terminated intern had claimed the company kept two IT networks, one you saw and one you were not supposed to know existed. The intern's name was blacked out. The file was sealed. No further details. Lee requested the file unsealed under investigative necessity. The judge agreed. Inside were handwritten notes from the internal review. The intern had claimed they were asked to delete specific files under orders from a department head, files they later learned were employee reports marked unconfirmed. When they hesitated, their badge was deactivated and they were escorted out. The department head, Nathan Cole. It was no longer about what Margaret had found. It was about what had been quietly erased for years. Lee turned her attention to Cole's assistant, the same one who had resigned after the disappearance. Her name was Eliza Ward. She had not responded to previous outreach, and her listed address had gone cold. But a record search revealed she had recently sold a car and transferred the title at a DMV office within driving distance. Lee requested surveillance footage from the transaction. The tape showed a woman in dark glasses, hair pulled back, signing documents quickly and keeping her head down. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. A sharp-eyed DMV clerk confirmed the ID photo matched. Eliza Ward was still in the region. Lee issued a private investigator dispatched to locate her, not for prosecution but for questioning. If Eliza had left under pressure, she might still hold the key to Margaret's fate. But that same evening, a courier delivered an envelope to Lee's office. No return address. Inside was a single printed photo. It showed the exterior of Lee's apartment complex, taken from street level. Nighttime. Her building lit behind a curtain of bare trees. Across the bottom, someone had written in thick black marker, "You are following the wrong ghost." The message was no longer subtle. Lee now understood that she had not uncovered a trail, she had been allowed to walk it. Fed just enough truth to build confidence. Shown just enough evidence to feel momentum. But every lead had a boundary. Every breakthrough arrived right on time, and now she was being told it was all part of something else. She pulled out every physical file connected to Michael Trent. Work records, background checks, intern evaluations. One HR note stood out, a line about Trent being moved from logistics to digital archiving 2 weeks before Margaret vanished. The request had come from Cole's assistant. No documented reason. Trent had worked near the same server corridor. He had been assigned cleanup work on old drive units. Was he a witness or a decoy? Lee replayed his recording, the 12-second whisper he made in private. "I heard it. I did not imagine it." But the next line echoed differently now. "Unless this is already too late." Was Michael warning himself or someone else? The forensic team contacted Lee that morning. They had decrypted a partially damaged segment from the burnt flash drive. The file was corrupted, but one frame survived. It was an image, grainy, low light, but identifiable. It showed Margaret standing in the server corridor, facing someone out of frame. In her hand was a flash drive, the same make and shape as the one found burned. She looked afraid. And in the background, almost obscured by server racks, was a reflection in the glass panel. Not Cole. Michael Trent. Lee's breath caught. She checked the timestamp. 5:27 p.m., 4 minutes before Michael claimed he overheard Margaret speaking in the stairwell. His memory was real. His voice was genuine, but his location, impossible. He could not have overheard anything if he was already with her, unless he had been part of the meeting, unless the testimony had been designed not to reveal a truth but to bury one. Lee sat back in her chair. Everything began to align in reverse. Michael had been moved into the right place, fed the right details. Motivated to believe, he had remembered something meaningful. But what if the memory was planted, shaped just enough to push attention toward Cole, while erasing whoever else had been there? And now, the message was clear. The real ghost in the system had never been Cole. The real ghost had just taken the stand under oath. Lee had walked into court that morning expecting to cross-examine a senior technician. Instead, she found herself staring across the room at the one person she thought she understood. Michael Trent. Witness 49. The quiet intern whose memory had cracked the timeline. the accidental observer whose statement restructured the entire case, and now the reflected face in a recovered image present unacknowledged 4 minutes before Margaret Weller vanished. He sat calmly in the gallery, not scheduled to testify again, not part of the day's agenda, just present, watching. Lee turned her focus inward. She replayed every beat of Michael's statement, his precise recollections, his strange detachment, his silent fear. But now fear looked different. It no longer resembled a witness scared of speaking out. It resembled someone scared of being found out. She left the courtroom quietly and returned to her office. She called her forensic analyst. Run Trent's badge history, all of it. Not just the day of the disappearance, everything from 2 months before through 2 months after. The analyst paused. "There is a problem," he said. "The badge logs were overwritten after Margaret vanished. The only preserved entries are the ones you flagged for that week." Lee froze. "Overwritten how?" "Manual override. Someone used administrative credentials to purge all secondary-level entries. Only executive badges and primary access levels were retained." Another layer. She requested a new approach system-level audit, not badge entries, power draws, server keystroke records, hidden logs that reflected terminal use independent of named access. The analyst hesitated, then agreed. It would take time. Meanwhile, Lee reviewed every statement Michael had made under oath. Nothing he said was false technically. But certain things stood out now. He had never said he saw Margaret in the stairwell, only that he heard her. He had never named Cole outright, just described a man of similar build. He had used phrases found only in confidential files, claiming he had read them online by accident. And he had sent himself an email saying, "I still remember 3 days after the disappearance, too soon to forget anything, but right on time to construct a memory." Lee made a decision. She filed a motion to recall Michael Trent to the stand. The defense objected. The judge reviewed, then granted it. The following day the courtroom was silent as Michael walked to the stand again. He appeared calm. He folded his hands, swore his oath. Lee began with routine questions, reconfirmation of his employment dates, his work department, his previous role in logistics. Then she shifted. "You stated previously that you heard a conversation near the stairwell on the day Margaret Weller disappeared. You said it occurred at approximately 5:30 p.m. Is that correct?" "Yes," Michael replied. "You were not facing the individuals. You only heard voices." "Yes. You believed one of the voices belonged to Margaret Weller." "I did. And the other, I could not confirm." Lee took a breath. "Do you remember where you were standing when you heard this?" Michael looked uncertain for the first time. "I believe I was near the break room." Lee approached the witness stand with a document. She handed it to the judge, then to the defense, then showed it to Michael. "This is a still image recovered from a backup server. It shows you standing with Margaret Weller in the server corridor at 5:27 p.m. The timestamp and your facial reflection are verified. Would you like to explain this?" Michael's mouth opened slightly. He leaned forward, looked at the image, then nodded. "I forgot about that. I guess I did see her before. I must have mixed up the time." Lee's voice remained steady. "This places you in the corridor 3 minutes before your stated location near the break room. That is a significant discrepancy. Can you explain why you failed to disclose this?" Michael's eyes shifted. His posture stiffened. "I was not hiding it. I just remembered it differently." Lee pressed. "Were you with Margaret when she disappeared?" Michael looked toward the judge, then the gallery, then back to Lee. "No." His voice was calm again. "I left before she did." Lee turned toward the screen. She brought up a map of the building's floor plan. "There is only one working exit from that corridor, through the stairwell. You claimed you heard her speaking in that stairwell, but if you were already inside the corridor with her, there is no way you could have overheard that conversation." Michael's face darkened slightly, but he said nothing. Lee took one step closer. "Is it possible your testimony was designed not to mislead but to distract, to give just enough credible detail to point the investigation toward someone else?" Michael remained silent. The judge intervened. "Witness, you are under oath. You must respond." Michael inhaled slowly. "I remember what I remember. That is all I can say." Lee had one more piece. She introduced a recovered terminal log. a power draw anomaly on a workstation adjacent to the server room at 5:29 p.m. The credentials used matched a terminal later linked to a digital deletion command. The file name, Weller Report Audio. Did you delete a file submitted by Margaret Weller the day she disappeared? Michael looked straight at Lee. No. Lee showed him the system trail, the keystroke pattern, the authentication match, the timestamp. It was your login, Mr. Trent. It was your terminal, it was your time of day. Michael's lips parted. He leaned into the microphone. I do not remember doing that. The courtroom was still. The judge recessed the session. Outside the courtroom, Lee sat alone in her office. Her assistant entered quietly and placed a note on her desk. It had arrived by courier. Plain envelope, no return address. The note was printed in standard font, no handwriting, just one sentence. You almost found him. Underneath, a name was written, E. Ward. Lee's heart stopped. Eliza Ward, Cole's former assistant, the one who had resigned, the one who had signed off on Michael's department transfer, the one who had vanished. She was not missing, she was watching, and she wanted Lee to find the next piece. The envelope was unlike the others, clean edges, no smudging. The paper inside was thick, heavier than standard copy stock. The message was printed, no handwriting, no signature, but the name at the bottom was all Lee needed. E. Ward, Eliza Ward, Nathan Cole's former assistant, the person who approved Michael Trent's quiet transfer into digital archiving 2 weeks before Margaret Weller vanished, the one who signed off on the consultant who had since disappeared, the one whose trail had gone cold until now. Lee brought the note to her forensic analyst. No prints, no DNA trace. But one clue, the printer that produced it left a subtle microdot signature, a near-invisible pattern used in specific high-end office models for tracking internal security documents. The model was rare, mostly used by legal firms and secure finance offices. It narrowed the origin to 7 buildings within driving distance. Lee selected one, a corporate branch that had once managed financial reporting for Nathan Cole's division. It had closed down after a merger. The building now housed only a private archiving service. She visited in person. The receptionist claimed no knowledge of any E. Ward, but when Lee mentioned the internal printer microdot, the woman hesitated. Then, without a word, slid a plain card across the counter. No name, just an address, a second location. It was a private home on a quiet street surrounded by untrimmed hedges and an old mailbox taped shut. Lee knocked. Eliza Ward opened the door. She looked different, older, thinner, eyes rimmed with something beyond exhaustion, not fear, something deeper, like a person who had carried a truth too long and was unsure if anyone else deserved to hear it. She let Lee in without a word. They sat in a bare living room. One chair, one folding table. A shoebox near the wall. Eliza spoke first. I thought someone would come earlier. Lee said nothing, just waited. Eliza opened the shoebox. Inside were printouts, flash drives, and a spiral notebook with handwriting in tight, controlled loops. She gave me this the day before she vanished, Eliza said. Margaret. The notebook was a timeline, names, passwords, comments overheard, meeting times, a diagram of the server room layout, a list of files, some real, some deleted. She was building a report, Eliza continued, but she knew she could not send it through official channels. She had already been warned once, so she asked me to hold it. Told me not to open it unless something happened. Lee flipped through the notebook. Margaret had suspected multiple levels of misconduct, not just from Cole. She had traced false promotions, internal hush payments, access manipulation, and at least one unauthorized surveillance loop tied to employee profiling. And Michael? Lee asked. Eliza hesitated. I was told to transfer him. I did not ask why. He was quiet, easy to overlook. Someone told me he would be helpful with archiving, that he was clean. I assumed it was just an HR shuffle. Later, I wondered if I had helped plant him. Lee looked down at the pages. One note stood out, a line in all caps underlined twice. He is not watching us. He is watching them. The pronoun was ambiguous, but the direction was not. Michael had not been placed to monitor Margaret. He had been placed to monitor the system around her, who noticed her, who listened, who acted. But somewhere along the line, something had shifted. Either he realized too much or the people who placed him lost control of what he remembered. Lee asked Eliza why she disappeared. "I did not disappear," Eliza said quietly. "I walked away. I gave them everything. My silence was payment. But when I saw that kid on the witness stand, repeating lines Margaret once whispered to me in private, I knew someone had engineered it, not to find the truth, to rewrite it." Lee took the drives and the notebook and thanked her. Eliza gave no goodbye, just closed the door behind her. Back at the office, Lee handed everything to digital forensics. Within 30 hours, the team recovered partial voice files, meeting schedules that had been deleted from internal systems, and one short audio clip, an unverified recording Margaret had taken on her phone and labeled Insurance One. It was faint, but two voices could be heard. The first was male, calm, calculating. "You do not have to be the one who says anything. You just need to wait until it dies down." Margaret's voice followed, tense, controlled. "If I wait, then someone else disappears." Then static. The male voice was later matched by voice pattern analysis to Michael Trent. 97% certainty. Lee had enough. She requested a direct arrest warrant. Michael was brought in without incident. He did not resist, did not ask for a lawyer, did not speak during processing. Only after hours of silence in the interview room did he finally speak. "I never meant for it to go that far," he said. "I thought she would just quit." He had been placed as a low-level observer, trained to follow certain behavioral patterns, instructed to monitor nonverbal cues and report concerns to a security liaison. That liaison had been the so-called consultant, Jay Carter. When Margaret began compiling her file, Michael had been told to divert her, build rapport, disarm her, but she refused to stop. He claimed he never touched her, never followed her out of that corridor. He left her standing there with the flash drive. He never saw her again, but he admitted deleting the file she submitted. He admitted fabricating the memory about the stairwell. He admitted watching Lee from the gallery and sending the first email. The lie, he said, was meant to protect her. "I thought if I pointed at Cole, the rest would collapse." It had not collapsed. It had held until now. With Eliza's materials and Michael's partial confession, the court moved to formal charges: obstruction, tampering with evidence, unlawful surveillance, and accessory to disappearance. Nathan Cole was placed under investigation again, but this time as part of a broader corporate probe. Multiple executives resigned in the weeks that followed. A new forensic unit was brought in to reevaluate the original disappearance. Margaret Weller's body was never found. But her voice, recorded, documented, and preserved by the one person she trusted, became the final testimony. Michael Trent was sentenced to 12 years. When asked at sentencing why he had confessed, he gave only one answer: "She remembered everything. I tried to forget it."